So once you have your timber blank, you want to mark your diagonals on each end, and on one end you need to drill a hole. Now that hole should match the depth of your scroll chuck wood screw for the body length, and its diameter should match the diameter of its shank, so excluding the thread. You want the thread to be able to grip into something. Now I'm using a digital bevel box here to set to 45 and putting my saw over to 45 degrees. Now this is just to remove some of the wastage on that blank so that I'm not wasting time on the lathe with my roughing gouge. So I'm just going to take off each corner. Now I've just made sure the amount that I'm taking off isn't going to eat into the maximum diameter I can turn on this block, and this block is 60 by 60. Now you can see I've already put that the wood screw into the end there. Now I had to mount mine using the lathe scroll chuck. You may have a flat section on yours, and if you do, you can just put that in using a spanner or a shifter. So once you've taken those edges off, you can mount it in your lathe between centres and free spin it just to make sure nothing's touching with your tool rest, which should be set just below centre. And you then just want to turn down that timber until it's just round. If you already know the outermost diameter that you want, you can just turn it straight down to that. So I'm just using the roughing gouge to do that. And then once round, you're ready to start drilling some holes in the end. So you can mount your drill truck into your tailstock, and for a pepper mill, the first hole you need to drill has a diameter of 38mm, and you want to do that to a depth of 12mm. So if you don't have a measurement on your tailstock there, just mark it on a bit of timber and fit it in. Now the second hole you want to mark is another 30mm. So I'm using a measuring stick and I've marked my first one of 12, the second one there is 30mm from that 12, so I can continuously check the depth. Okay, so this is the diameter of 28. You'll notice there I've got a steady arm set up as well, just for a little extra support. Okay, so as you remove it, you'll notice you do get a lot of build-up of sawdust in there. So you want to remove that quite frequently and blow out that dust, just to help keep everything running true and not to get any burning and smoke coming out of there. So now you just want to mark the length for your final hole. Now this is up to you. So the length of your timber block needs to be equal to the length of your kit that you've purchased, remembering that it's inset a little at the base. Okay, so the length of the body I've determined, and I've got a 25mm Forstner bit in an extension bar, and I'll just drill it bit by bit to be able to clear that hole out until I've got to my final depth. So once you're at your final depth there, you can bring your tailstock back up, and I've got a cone-shaped tailstock on there which will fit into that hole, so make sure you've got a large enough one for that, and that'll stabilise it while you turn between centres again. So I'm just marking the length of my body to match the salt mill that I've already done. And I'll use some vernier calipers to take some measurements from my salt mill to make this one as identical as possible. So I'm just roughing down to that size first, and you'll notice my grip there. I've got a thumb on top to reduce chatter, and my first finger underneath runs along the underneath side of the tool rest, helps keep my passes nice and parallel to the centre. So I accidentally roughed off that line, and now I'm going to take a measurement that I need to turn the top to, and I'm just going to part down to that depth of parting tool. So very similar grip, and just slightly driving down to centre. And you should have nice sharp tools, so it shouldn't take much effort at all. So I'm now just measuring the depth of my taper and taking its diameter off my salt mill. And then I'm just using a bowl gouge to do my shaping. So you can see there I've put the taper on it. I'm happy with the shape and I'm now ready to sand it. Okay, so with your sanding you want to start with your 80 grit sandpaper and work your way all up to 600 or even higher if you wish. If you start to see scratches staying in your job, you need to go back to the previous grits to try and get those scratches out, or they'll really show through when you polish it. So I use the UV traditional wax and I apply it with a lint-free cloth in both directions. So you'll see me applying it by hand first, rolling the lathe towards me, and I'd also roll it forwards as well to make sure I really get into the pores. Okay, then you can turn your lathe on and really work it in there. So I'm still using a wet section of the cloth, and then you want to find a dry section of your cloth or a new cloth to buff it. So now in terms of removing it from the lathe, I just use a parting tool. Now remember, you've got that 25mm hole running through there, so you don't want to part all the way through to that, or it could end up anywhere. So I'm parting that down to about 30mm, which will leave about 2.5mm the whole way around. And as I get really close, I can remove that tool rest and just use a saw to remove it nice and steady, and holding on to that loose end now. Okay, I do get a little bit of a rough cut there, but I just put a bit of sandpaper on a flat bench that I can then hold that upside down on and work backwards and forwards. So now I've got a 6mm drill bit going into what will be the handle of my shaker, and that depth has to pass through the whole depth of the handle. So you can well and truly go as far as you need to, and I just marked that distance with a bit of tape. So bringing up your tailstock again, and what you need to do now is turn a little tenon that will fit in that 25mm hole that's on the body. So you want it to be just under the 25mm. So you need to keep checking that with some calipers, and then you can bring the body back to it to check the fit. So you don't want it super tight, it needs to be able to spin on there easily, but not too loose either. Okay, now you can make that tenon a little wider if you wish. I do. Okay, gently driving the parting tool down towards centre, just to the width you want. There's no set rule for that bit. Now if you noticed on my salt mill, I had a little gap, what looked like a little gap between the body and the head, so I just turn another little shoulder with the parting tool again, and I match its width and its depth by using the calipers. Yeah, unfortunately my battery started to go flat there, but that's okay, I can just read it by the measurements on it, and so I just want to turn that down to that measurement. So I've got that height there now, and much like I did with the body, I want to put some measurements on here so it's widest width and its full height there, and the diameter I want it to match down to where it will sit above the body. So I'm just turning another little shoulder there just as a guide. It's quite narrow, and I can go back to using my spindle gouge, or bowl gouge, sorry, and just shaping that, rounding it over. And it is really important to keep your tools nice and sharp, so I use the Robert Sorby Deluxe sharpening system, and it gives you a perfect edge every time. Now when I need to do the shape for the top of it, I use the parting tool just to clear out some space. Now be careful not to go too far because you do have that 6mm hole running through there. So I've taken a measurement from the knob that comes in the kit from Timber Bits, and I'm just turning it down to that because that's what I want the very top to match to. You can see it's quite fine in there. So I'm giving myself plenty of room. So when I go over to my spindle gouge, I can work towards that spot without worrying that I'm going to hit any of the timber. I'm just trying to round it over to that exact diameter. And so once you're happy with your shape there, you can go through that sanding and finishing process again and removing it from the lathe using a saw. You can get tools that you can remove with, I don't have one. But the saw seems to do it fine for me. So it's been polished up, it's time to put the mechanism in it now. So I pop it through from the base. It fits in there in those two spots where you need to pre-drill for your screws to go into. 1, 2. So I just put it upside down in an open vise, pre-drill my first hole, and I've used the tape to mark the depth of the hole. And the kit comes with 2 side screws. So you've got the 2 sizes there. You want to use the longer ones here. And I always put these in by hand. There's less chance of burying the head of your screw this way. Then you can put the second one in. Okay, and that's secured the grinder shaft retainer in place. So from the top now you can take the knob off and the shaft drive plate. You can check the fit of your handle and that you've got some thread coming out the top. It should be fine. So you want to put that drive plate over the tenon that you turned, lined up with the hole, because the hole's round and that little hole through that plate is rectangular. And then pop the screws in one at a time by hand. And so once you've put this second screw in, you want to line up that rectangular hole over the thread. You'll see that you've got 2 flat faces and it will just slide over top of that. Okay, then you can just put the top knob back on. Good to go. There is a finished pepper mill to match the already done salt mill.